All right, good afternoon. We're glad to be able to come and present to you this conference today. We're holding a regional conference in Bethel. This is one of the 7 conferences that we're going to be having throughout the state to study a subject that's the advantages and disadvantages of prototypical school design in Alaska. Basically, we're gathering a team together to explore the pros and cons of whether or not a prototype school or maybe prototype components would work within the state of Alaska. My name is Bill Tatum. I'm with Envision Architecture. This is David Sturtz. He's with DeYoung Richter. We're the prime consulting team to the Department of Education. And Mike Gady is the owner's representative with the Department of Education. This is Paul Weisner. Paul really brings a unique perspective to our team. He's a civil engineer, but he's also what we've called a stakeholder specialist because he was with the Northwest Arctic Borough up in Kotzebue for 20 years as the facility director. So he really knows how to speak the language of the facilities departments and has a really good understanding of how projects work and function and just knows the nooks and crannies of a building. But we also have another group of people on the consulting team that's not really here with us today. It's BDFM engineers. They're a structural component to our team, and RSA engineers is a mechanical, electrical, and energy component as well. And one other stakeholder specialist that is really worth mentioning is Kathy Christie. Again, not with us at this meeting since we're doing a lot of different things today. But she's a stakeholder specialist. She's essentially an independent consultant that has expertise with the Northwest Arctic Borough, Lake and Penn Peninsula District, and she is really a facility operator and independent contractor that helps independent or school districts across the state understand how to develop projects, how to go get the money for what they need to do things with. So that's our team. I wanted Mike just to give us a brief overview of why we're here and what the state is looking for with this report.
Basically, last year, the legislature had a question, and they wanted to further investigate the possibility of prototypes and if it's a good idea or a bad idea. There wasn't much information for them to go back on. The last time that the department actually looked at the prototypical design question was back in 1997. So the information that we had on prototypes was actually getting pretty dated. So as part of House Bill 278, they included a provision on the back of it that said we would like the Department of Education and Early Development to prepare and submit a report to the legislature no later than June 15th of this year, 2015, on the benefits and disadvantages of using prototypical designs in school construction in both the rail belt and rural areas of the state. And that was the assignment that we were given. So along with the bill that they passed, they appropriated some money to do a study, and that allowed us to issue an RFP, and then as a result we were able to hire Envision and DeYoung Richter and then the consultants that we gathered. So in the RFP process, I kind of came up with the kind of design of how the study should come about, and I guess the prime consideration I had for doing this study was that we wanted to have as broad grasp across the state, gathering stakeholder information. We wanted to not just have one opinion put into this, but many. We felt that the more people we had giving knowledge and opinion into the report, the more valid it would be. Again, the purpose of this, the research that we're doing right now and why we're going around the state and gathering this information, is that we want to create a reference document for the legislature to use. This would be something if a legislator possibly wanted to consider using prototype schools, but they don't have that information of making a decision. we wanted to be able to create a document that they could go to and look at both the benefits and the disadvantages of prototypical school design. And we wanted to cover that as thoroughly as possible, to give them the broadest range of knowledge possible also, so that they can make an informed decision on that important question.
I think it's also important to note that beyond just facilities, the discussion has been revolving around prototypical components, operating systems to a school. That is also a consideration that we're doing as we talk to the various regions. We are looking and going into the schools and say, we're recognizing, and we've already done some research, and David is going to be talking to that to some extent here in a minute, but we've arguably diversity is a problem for prototyping anything, and with the diversity of the entire state of Alaska, it may be not premature to necessarily say that prototyping a single school plan for all of Alaska is probably not going to happen. So as we're going through that and building our case for both advantages and disadvantages, we're looking at components of buildings. As the discussion has continued to progress, we've also looked at the possibility of improved or maybe a statewide ed spec that or maybe statewide guidelines and design principles, possibly like I say, design guidelines. So the conversation is expanding. As at this point, we've already been to. This is really our third regional conference, but we've been to five sites already as part of the group. And so as we talk to the various people coming to these conferences, we're finding more and more ways to look at what we might want to do in terms of how we report to the state. It's been actually very exciting to see what is on the hearts and minds of people as we talk to them. So what have we done to date? Basically, we're here in Bethel. We're in the process of doing a regional conferencing, but what we did first, David has already, before we even came to this point, what have we done? He conducted a national research process in his office where they went and looked up all the various information that they could possibly find on prototyping schools across the nation, so that he would have a better background as to what we were going to possibly find and maybe have some guiding principles on how to conduct this research. So he's completed that. And now, and then for about a month or so, we developed questionnaires getting ready for the regional conference. That's what we're in the process of doing. Developing a set of questions for the citizens group, for the district personnel, for architects and engineers, design professionals, to be able to gather information related to this topic. And the hope is to have an answering to the questionnaires. Those of you who are joining us by video over our website, that's what you're here to do, is to answer those questionnaires, and we'll be providing you this presentation to be able to understand how we got to this point in the first place. So the questionnaires will be a vital part of that, and that's part of the state research that we're doing, the local level research. So it's national level, state level, and really in the regional conferences, we're kind of doing case studies of going out to school sites. We've been to Barrow. We visited 2 schools in Barrow. We went to Fairbanks, and we visited 2 schools there. Yesterday, we were in the Mat-Su Valley, went out to Talkeetna, went back to Wasilla. We were in Anchorage, visited 4 more schools in that group, and today we went to 3 schools here in Bethel, and we will be continuing from this point to go down to Kodiak tomorrow, and then in a couple weeks, or towards the end of the month, 1st of April, we'll be going down to Juneau. The intent, again, as Mike said, is to cover and to reach out to the state of Alaska as much as we can, and to personally engage with people to discuss this topic. It's very important to the state. We're finding it very, very beneficial in our research, and that's what we're in the process of doing. That said, like I said, we'll be having additional regional conferences. We will have a statewide conference at the end of that, and then we will do the actual writing, primarily done by Dion Richter. They're the primary research team to do this work. And then we will all, as a group, be looking and analyzing and refining that report for about a month, and with the end of the report being sometime in late May, early June. With that, we're going to let David go ahead and tell us what he's done to date and lead us into the questionnaire process.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Okay, so I'm just going to talk for about, give you a 10-minute overview of the research done to date and some of the preliminary findings. And then we'll go from that point to the questionnaire. For those of you who are joining us online, links will be provided for you to take the questionnaire. We spent better part of a month and a half developing questionnaires with the entire team for our citizens, for our district folks at the administration and facilities level primarily, and then as well for our professional design committee community, so architects and engineers and so forth. So let me just give a brief 10-minute overview of the research to date, and then after that you take the questionnaires at your leisure. So before we start, define your terms, right? So what's a prototype? Well, what we propose is that these are operational definitions. These are definitions that we're using as the basis for our conversation. So when we say prototype, what we mean is any school plan that is repeated more than once using the original blueprint as the basis, and that modifications are largely confined to matters of differing site need. So that's our operational definition for a prototype. We know that there are variations on every theme. This is no different. Visiting schools that, sure, they use a prototype as a basis of design, but they create a new ed spec for each new construction. Well, and then it's modified not only for site, but for moving classrooms or adjacency or so on and so forth. Well, that's a variation on this theme of a prototype, but it would not be strictly a prototype, and that's how we understand the concept regarding the research. Component prototype design would take the same theme and apply it to the pieces within the building. So a component or operating system that supports or is integrated into the school design regardless of whether or not the school design is a prototypical plan. And that can be repeated more than once using the original blueprint as a basis, and there again, that modifications are largely limited to matters of differing site need. An important point here is that you could have an original spec, original design for a school, and still go in for renovation and insert a component that was designed for to be placed in a variety of different schools using the same kind of component, be it an air handler, boiler, storage, anything of the like. Okay. An educational specification. So while the charge is to look at the benefits and challenges of prototypical school design, and we go further from just simply the shell and the classrooms and so forth, but in the core to also include the components as a prototypical part of our study. An educational specification is something that has come up in conversation, not only in the development of the questionnaire, but in our regional conferences. And is a layer that's less specific than the prototype, where it's more programmatic and process oriented as opposed to the blueprint being the same repeated over time. So an educational specifications describe the current and future educational activities that a school facility should accommodate and provide written communication from the owner or the educator to the design professional. They illustrate briefly and clearly the goals and outcomes, activities to be conducted, the persons to be served, spatial relationships of the program areas, equipment needs, technology needs, and any special considerations. I like to think of it as an educational specification as a narrative blueprint. And the actual blueprint to follow can vary depending upon user needs, site needs, and architectural preference. So terms out of the way, what are the findings? In general, the research suggests that a facility prototype design is beneficial when you have a large district that's experiencing an acute period of rapid growth, necessitating the construction of multiple schools of the same configuration in a short window of time. Now, again, defining terms, you need to define what these things are. What's a large school? What's a small school? Hold that thought. We'll define that in a minute as we go through to the next one. So again, it looks like a facility prototype approach is beneficial for a large district who needs to build multiple schools within a very short window of time at the same configuration, saving on design time because you do it once and you repeat it, and because you have to do multiples at once. Now, so there's our why. And so in this case, when you're saving the time, of course, time is money. So when you're saving time in design, you're saving money. And you can do this in a singular district because the districts tend to be fairly homogeneous. The variables are relatively few when contrasted with multiple districts attempting the same thing. For example, looking at Anchorage and Matsu, whereas they're somewhat geographically related, but you have some different site needs in Anchorage versus Matsu. You have some different configurations and program needs and so forth. Those tend to muddy the waters and make it more complicated. But in a single large district where the variables are few, relatively speaking, and you know what you need. If you need to generate multiple schools in one short period of time, you can do so saving money and providing some equity within your district because folks are getting what is at that time up to date as far as design and construction materials. Now, when is it not beneficial or overly challenging? Well, when a relatively small district, diverse district, or multiple districts attempt to plan together for new construction in any situation, growth, or otherwise. And this goes back to that scenario that I mentioned before, the hypothetical Anchorage-Matsu plan. And that what happens is, for example, small, diverse, or multiple districts attempting to plan designs together run up against two main challenges that the research is finding. One is the challenge of diversity, and the other challenge is time. Diversity. Well, diversity is a challenge to facility prototypes because the more configurations, geographic climate variances, cultural differences, educational program variances, philosophies, technology differences, and so on and so forth, the more diversity you get, the more difficult it is to find a standard design. And it goes by definition. You say a prototype would be a standard approach. The more diverse needs you have, the more difficult it is to standardize that. That's pretty well, just the word I'm looking for. Makes sense. There's another word there. Time. Intuitive. There it is. That's the word I was looking for. Time. Time is a challenge to facility prototypes because as time goes on, technology needs change, program philosophies can adapt. You may have different configurations that come aboard for either educational needs or for capacity needs. And change is inevitable over time, especially with all the variables that go into school operations and design. And so as time increases, the more time that goes on, the more difficult it is to maintain the standard of yesterday, because as soon as that standard is in place, tomorrow it becomes the standard of yesterday. And so the shorter period of time, you can constrain your prototyping plan, the more likely it is to be successful within your district. The longer time, the more challenging. So large. Defining large and small. So really using the research as a basis, we define large and small in terms of a large district is one that in a period of growth would need to build multiples of the same school at the same time, more or less. And perhaps a large district is one that has at least 5 schools, looking at the different schools that benefited, districts rather that benefited from a prototype versus not. But quite frankly, this is a very conservative number, that the districts who are really benefiting, you'll see in a minute, are quite large. And a small district is one that does not need to build multiple schools of the same configuration or program type within a relatively short period of time. So if you have a relatively small district, say you have 4 schools, 5 schools, that if you have rapid growth proportional to your population, that's still not enough to build multiples of the same configuration at one time. You simply don't have the size to need that kind of construction at one time. So here's some little vignettes, examples from the research. So 36 states have attempted a statewide prototypical design project, but all have abandoned the approach as being impractical and uneconomical over a longer period of time. For example, this is attempted in California, involving 13 school districts, and the idea was, we could take these 13 districts, we're growing, we're California, we're a large state with many districts, many schools, we can save money on design time by having a prototypical design for these 13 districts. Didn't work out. Too many variables, and you had to go back to the plans and rehash them and personalize them, and pretty soon you're going back to an individual site plan for all of the districts. New York State is a great example because New York State was one of those 36 that attempted the plan. Didn't work. Too many differences between Buffalo and New York City, Binghamton, the Finger Lakes, just Rochester. Coming up with a single prototype for the different configurations didn't work. However, in New York City, the largest district in the nation, needed to build 50 schools between 88 and 96, and found the program saved time and money. Now, NYC is the largest district in the country. 50 schools, that's a lot of schools, and you multiply the design time out, you have over 50 schools over that period of time, you could really save quite a bit on construction time and money. And they're able to do so because in New York City is not worried about urban versus rural. There's no rural there, and so the configurations are similar, the sites are similar, the programs, all that being relatively homogeneous, it made a lot of sense. Clark County, Nevada, was able to build 68 schools between 98 and 09, and believe that they were saving between 5 to 10% on each school project, which of course you multiply that over time, that's good savings. So in contrast to the larger districts, one of the case studies here was in Haverhill, Massachusetts. Less than 20 schools needed to build 4 K-5 schools due to a fast-growing population. And while they were happy with the educational adequacy of the design, it fit their current program needs and educational delivery philosophy, because the site adaptations were significant, they really didn't see the savings that they were anticipating because they had to go back and redo that again. So where you had a short period of time, that's possibly beneficial for a prototype. You had too much diversity, not a lot of scale, and so it didn't work out. So very basic formula here that you can think of is the less diversity that you have as a district, the more students / buildings, and the higher your growth rate, the more likely it is that a prototypical design would be beneficial to you, both educationally from an equity standpoint and monetarily from a planning standpoint. However, if your diversity is relatively high, you have you're a smaller district, and it doesn't matter your growth at this point. If these two variables are contrasting there, you're probably not in a situation where a prototype is going to save on the financial side. And the longer time goes on, the less likely the educational adequacy promotes equity because of the changes in program needs, educational philosophy, so on and so forth. So that's facility prototyping, a short summary of that. Now, components. We mentioned that we were studying components as well. There's not a significant body of research on component prototyping benefits and challenges in K-12 education. Why? You could speculate. It's a pretty niche argument, a pretty niche question. And so what we have done is tailor the questionnaires that you'll take here in a minute to really focus on this question of component prototyping. When could it be beneficial? And under what circumstances? We're really not interested in a report, and will not produce one that says prototype good or prototype bad, and facility prototype bad and component prototype good. That's way too simplistic. What we want to really get at is under what circumstances would these considerations be more beneficial than challenging, and vice versa. And so your surveys are going to help us gather that data. We'll be able to contrast it with information we'll be able to gather from the districts that some of our district partners have helped provide, as well as open source data to start to put this puzzle together and perhaps show where some of these needs converge to the point where you could have some benefit from either a component or facility prototype, or even as an NSPEC, as Bill mentioned. The conversation has really evolved where users have suggested to us explicitly in many cases, hey, there could be some similar process that would be helpful and promote equity, or from a simply a process standpoint, from a spec standpoint, from a design standard. So those are things that we're exploring in conversation with our meetings, as well as in the surveys. And your feedback, what I'll do is I'll take all the survey results and I will quantify them, and that will be embedded in the report that will be presented to the legislature in June, and will be an open public document view, so everybody can see their results and how it was used to inform the report. And that's a wrap. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and proceed into the questionnaire and have a discussion from that point. Thank you very much for your time and interest.